So this question is pointing to a tip for having a reliable, long-term, enduring practice. Is it more effective to stick with one core practice consistently, or should I rotate between different practices to not get bored and stay engaged? Very good question. I think the big picture answer is it's different for different people. So some people stick with one core practice and others rotate. I'll comment a little bit upon the reasons why one might do one or the other, and then I'll also comment on this interesting language to not get bored. So first, I know people who will rotate. They'll rotate in a couple of different ways. They might have an app or they're familiar with the different practices and they like to practice in silence, but they guide themselves. And they don't know in advance what they're necessarily going to practice, but they sort of do what the spirit moves them when they sit down to practice. But they know they're going to practice and they sit down and they know and are able to draw upon a practice either through an app or through self-guiding, and that's what they do. Others might have it where on Mondays they do this, on Wednesdays they do this, on Fridays they do this, or on the weekends they lay down and do a longer body scan. But in the morning, during the week, they do, what seems to be most practical given, what their morning's like and what their day is like. So they make it doable, and it changes in some ways because of length of time and things like that. The more you firmly understand the nature of practice, the reasons to practice, and the methodologies for practice, this, I think, becomes easier because it doesn't require any heavy lifting other than just sitting and doing the practice or having a general schedule for that. That works well for people, and some people certainly do it because they want to keep it interesting. And if they do the same one every day, they might feel like they would get bored or lose, not be as engaged. Others, and I would say most people I know probably stick with one core practice. That doesn't mean they don't from time to time vary, because there might be reasons why they might practice focused attention on a regular basis, for example. But if they're having a difficult time with people at work, they might that morning do a connection practice or a loving kindness practice. So they have some versatility, but they stay in one lane primarily. I think most people probably that I know tend to do that. I will say this, though, that both are equally good as far as I'm concerned in terms of what you can expect in terms of the benefits of practice, the utility, the advantageous qualities that come about through practice. Now, I want to close with this one piece, though. Or should I rotate between different practices to not get bored and stay engaged? If the implication there is that if I don't rotate, I'm going to not stay engaged, then I think the question answers itself. If we're not going to stay engaged, which suggests to me we're likely to stop practicing, then we'd want to do something to bump up our motivation or our interest, and it might very well be that rotating does that. Also, sandwich practices that I created and share as a vehicle for packaging together your own type of practice with 3 different parts to it could be a form of rotation within a given period of practice that one might find useful for the reasons that you mentioned. I'm going to close specifically, though, with what I think is really an interesting line, which is to not get bored. Well, it could be that getting bored is something that follows us around in life. We get bored when we're waiting in line. We get bored when we're reading something that's going on for a long time. And it could be that the pattern that we notice that we tend to get bored is actually the thing that one of the things that we're interested in practicing. So we have greater facility and we're not so influenced by moments when we feel bored. And so in that case, to be doing a practice and noticing boredom, so meaning we're getting bored and we're through our mindfulness practice becoming more familiar and sort of deeper understanding of what it is that we're experiencing when we experience that which we label as being bored, that would actually be all the reason to practice. Right? We see that? So boredom, restlessness, fidgetiness, agitation, all these things will be arising in most people's practices from time to time, and that's actually the grist for the mill of what we can notice arising, and if we practice reliably, we'll also increasingly notice how it came out of nowhere, it seems, but maybe we begin to notice what it came out of, and it dissipates very usually shortly thereafter, especially if we can direct our attention, if it's the focus attention practice we happen to be doing, for example, back to that object of that we've selected, or if it's the body scan back to the area of the body where we last left off. And if it's open monitoring, sort of opening that aperture to more fully just take in and be receptive to the fullness of our experience. All right, I hope that is helpful. Good question. Also, one more thing that I thought about regarding staying with that core practice. For those who stay with one practice or primarily have one particular form of practice that they do, a benefit that can come from that is there's a ritualized and familiar feel to, especially if it's something like in the morning or at a regular time, that really can become a draw. It's like, oh, I'm going to do my practice now, and it's similar time, similar feel of the light and the busyness or quietude that one is experiencing at such times, and the practice itself sort of reinforces that. So it becomes a more familiar experience, and one that can deepen over time in large measure or in part because there is the continuity of a practice. It becomes more effortless. It doesn't call for so many moving parts and thinking about this or that. You just sort of can sink into it a little bit more readily. It reminds me a little bit, if you were to say the question were, should I have one type of coffee every day, or should I alternate a different flavor every day? Again, I'd say the same thing. Some people like the mixing it up, and some people like their favorite brew. And and just like one might say, no, I just have my one regular cup of coffee, which I think would make a lot of sense to people, or tea. That would be like having that core practice. And so you get up in the morning, for those of you who like coffee, and you pour yourself that cup of coffee, or you go to the coffee place and get your favorite coffee, and you sit down, and for a few minutes you've got this period of time where you're really just sort of savoring that experience, should that be your coffee drinking experience. And I think that's what can be brought to having a single a core practice that we can draw upon. That doesn't mean to say you can't mix it up and still settle in. It doesn't mean you can't get a different coffee and settle in. You certainly can. But I'd say keeping to one may lend itself to that a little bit more, which could be an advantage.